You're listening to the Inspiration Network podcast, a show that is designed to inspire heart-centered creatives, soulpreneurs, and mindfulness mavens to connect with their deepest inspiration and soul calling. I'm Carolyn Stewart, and I am a dream chaser, adventure seeker, teacher, student, lover of the quiet. I am all about sitting with it, writing about it, and practicing before I preach. And currently, I offer meditation and breathwork trainings and share inspiration through the Inspiration Network podcast, Insight Timer, soulful workshops, and retreats. Learn more about all of my offerings at inspiredme.ca or via social at theinspiredme. Without further ado, let's get to this week's topic. So Orest and I are going to be offering a really powerful experience on an upcoming weekend, and we're calling it the invitation. So it's a grief ritual and ancestral wisdom experience, and I'm really excited about it, Orest. And I'm curious if you'd like to start by just going into really what a grief ritual and ancestral immersion is. Maybe we can chat about that a bit.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so much conversation's happened around this workshop, and we know so many people just in our circle and the connections of circles that are connected to those circles, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who have, since COVID, have been struggling with loss. Loss of relationships, loss of jobs, loss of family members, loss of friends. Like, there just seems to be a lot of loss that's been on the table for us to look at. And I find it fascinating that most good people, smart people that we know, like myself included, until I actually sought out some help and some guidance, don't really know, or we're not, I won't say we're not equipped, because I think we are equipped. We're just not putting the puzzle pieces together to be able to resolve some of these things or to go through some of these things. And so there just seems to be an underlying hum of suffering that goes on that somehow we maybe perceive as stress, and we just sort of move with it. Like we don't necessarily address it, but it's just kind of there. But if we ever sat down and were quiet for a few moments, all of a sudden we have tears that start flowing. And that's easy enough to shut down at times, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of a grief ritual and the way that we've are going to roll this thing out. Number one, I love how elements of land-based learning are going to be a part of it. Going out on the land and doing things, in the nature area around the retreat space. I even heard, I was a part of a conversation yesterday where where there was a question asked, and it's like, what is it like for you to look at the land as your relation? Because more often than not, we don't look at the land like that. There's a spirit of the land, and so many indigenous people that I know and elders. That's why they have culture camps. That's why they go out on the land on retreat. Like, people go fast on the land, ceremonies, because it's the connection to the spirit of the land. And a lot of times, because the spirit of the land is really more in tune with the flow of what's happening energetically on the earth than I am in my mind, then it helps to unravel something. So I'm really, really grateful that we're connecting and tuning into that spirit, and that we have different practices that really we're opening up this ritual space, and we're connecting, like you said, with the wisdom of our ancestors and creating that opening and connecting in a different way in our nervous system. Not in our mind, because our mind is limited. It only sort of references and knows what it knows, and it's always trying to reference what it knows. This is something different, and that's what helps to create a really impactful place for people to do this ritual work around grief.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And, so often when we meet grief, when we meet this experience of loss, which is such a natural part of our life, we kind of push it away and think that we can tend to it later.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes one of those back burner items that shows up in maybe uncomfortable and unhealthy ways at times, because we just don't create space to tend to it. And so, part of why I believe that we're doing it right now is twofold. One, it might be seasonal, and then two, we're also in this time of the great turning. There's been a lot that has happened in our world over the last, let's say, even decade, that has brought up a lot of sense of loss, of disconnect, of confusion. And this time of the great turning, as Joanna Macy puts it, is all about shifting from this technocratic way of being that we've learned, that's very separate and isolated, towards reconnection and belonging. And one of the pieces that I find so potent when we move into this ritual space is we find that home, that space of belonging once again. And which is why I believe it's so beautiful that we actually bring in the ancestral piece too, because this sense of belonging, it requires us to tend to all of the places where we have felt a lack of belonging, or where we have felt disconnected. And so bringing in our sense of loss, and bringing in the ancestors and maybe some of the challenges that we've had there, can really help us to drop into this new space of possibility, and to tend to these experiences of loss, and to be witnessed in them, which I think is really, really important.
Well, especially in community. Like when you think back to wherever our families came from, if it's here on the land in what we call Canada, or somewhere in Turtle Island, if it's in Europe, if it's, wherever it might be, if it's Asia, whatever, people lived in smaller communities, like more tribally oriented communities. And there were no grief counselors. Like, somebody didn't pass away and you didn't, go and tell them to go see the grief counselor. We dealt with things in a sacred container as a community. It's like, we spoke about this before. When the news of a loss happens in a family, there's this initial shock wave that comes out, and it goes to the most immediate and close family members, and then it echoes out, and it goes to the really close friends of the family, and then it goes out to other parts of the family that maybe aren't so close, and then it goes out to friends of friends who knew that person and had interaction with them. And so there's like this ripple of waves of the news going out. And I think that's a part of the process of the natural shockwave absorption, because the family couldn't hold all that. The person, the family of the person who's crossed over, they wouldn't be able to hold all that. And that's why I believe after there's a passing, we go into that surreal place, and we're in an altered state of reality, and so all these people that come together to surround us in these concentric circles are helping to hold the energy of that shock and that loss, and then we're left to after the logistics are done and the funeral is over, then that support can pull away a little bit, and then we're kind of left on our own, and at some point we touch down out of that surreal place, and then we're left to process things as best as we can, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that really that brings up the question for me of who this grief work is for, because what I'm hearing is that one of the natural ways that we experience loss is through the loss of a loved one or somebody who's close to us. And yet there are so many other ways that we experience loss in our life. So who do you feel that this grief work is for?
Well, for people who have, experienced loss of a loved one, but other losses, like somebody who retired, even if they just retired, there's a huge loss of identity around who they were as this working person. Intimate relationships when they break up. How many of those breakups do you want to stack up on top of one another before you address the underlying grief and have the opportunity to draw a different experience towards you? Somebody who lost their job, somebody who, is changing a role through their work. There are so many losses that doesn't even cover the gamut, but those are the ones that immediately come into my mind, right?
Yeah.
Just even the loss of identity is a huge grieving, and then there's just this collective loss around the last few years and things that have been happening, the disconnection from community and a sort of a sense of a loss of I don't even know what I'd describe it as. Well, certainly there were smaller losses of freedom for sure, but there inside all of that, there's like the experience that we've all just come through. There's loss all over it. It's like this collective grief of a way of living or a way of being in the world that has come to a close. Like you said, that technocratic sort of way to do things. I think on some level we're all being called to be able to let go of whoever we think we are and whatever our position is in life, and really get into what's being called forth from me right now. What wants to, what's that deeper bow into service? What wants to be born through me in the world? And if we have these energetic blockages of grief because we can't let go of these old ideas about what we're supposed to be doing, who we are, and what our purpose in life is, then that can jam up our process a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and it's interesting as you were sharing all of these different pieces of when we experience loss. I'm noticing even for myself, my son is almost 18. And it's time for him to start shifting into a different way and of living, and our relationship is shifting, and so I'm noticing even not just the loss of relationship, but the ways that relationships change over time, and that includes our relationship with ourselves, and as you put it, the relationship with the greater whole, the community. And one of the pieces that was coming up for me as you spoke to it was that, the trust has been breached for me. I no longer have the trust. And that feels like a loss. And at the same time, I know that there are actually gifts in that. That sometimes we hold on to things for so long that maybe aren't serving us. And so the loss can create new possibilities.
Absolutely.
I genuinely believe that this grief work isn't just about tending to the losses, but about getting into the spaces of those gifts and what might actually be beneath it, what might actually be happening beyond our experience of loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like you said, it is surrounded with tons of possibility. But like, for example, for me, if I lose a loved one or a family member or something, there's this grief, there's this sadness and this sorrow and these tears that want to come and this mourning, sort of mournful energy. And when I walk away upon reflecting, I'm always like, I still have my life. I still have all these opportunities. And how can I honor the spirit and the essence and the gifts and the teachings and the things that person gave to me? And the only way that I know how I can honor that is to really live, my best life. Like stay open and just open my heart even more. And I understand why people go into a space where they shut their heart down and they get, disconnected and they stay in that place. The trouble with that is that if I go into a shutdown place and never do anything to reawaken or reopen, another loss happens and I shut down some more, and another loss happens and I shut down some more. Like, when am I ever living my best life? I'm just surviving. I'm struggling. Lots of times when we're in shutdown mode, then the world begins to be painted with this sort of brush where everything just looks dark and gloomy. And depression can set in. And long-term depression sets in, and it has these effects that people begin to isolate. And the more that you isolate, then you start to experience anxiety when you actually do come in social contact. And then, and then there's all these different ways when people are isolated that they cope. And the root of addiction is isolation, because people have designed this prison for themselves that they've shut themselves down inside of this cage. And in order to deal with that cage, you have to have some sort of outlet, and that can be unhealthy, addictive things, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm hearing you speak to those long-term effects of that unresolved grief.
Totally.
Yeah. If you'd like to keep sharing, I would love to hear more about it, because there's more in the way of addiction and the many ways that we suppress our experience of grief.
Well, and that always, anything that we're suppressing always has to come out in some way. The energy is going to release in some way. And so this is where, we talked about before, grief can disguise itself as anger. Grief can disguise itself as sadness.
Yeah.
It's like when that anger's there, we're walking around, if we're shut down and we're experiencing anger, like, we're triggered all the time. The smallest little things, the slightest little thing in traffic, the slightest little piece of news that we might hear that comes across our radar, like just little tiny irritations and frustrations that are constantly always there. And so it shows up as stress. And we know that the long-term challenges with stress are having health problems. And most specifically, when we continue to shut our heart down, and this is where, people don't always make this connection. I do, but the more that we continue to shut ourselves down and shut our heart down and move from this place of our mind, it's not surprising to me that people are having heart attacks. You can only shut down your heart so much, and then it's going to affect your physical, actual functioning of your heart.
Yes. Yeah.
And just the ability to have fun and have enjoyment and the spaces that are vulnerable, that are really filled with like the juice of life, for me anyway. I can't access that space if I'm in a shut down place.
Yes.
And I'm missing out on like tender moments that I could have within the intimacy of any kind of relationship that I have. When those moments call for me to summon my compassion for another human who is in suffering in some way, I can go there, but my mind is limited if I'm moving from my head. And when really what they need is a container filled with the energy of my heart and my emotional support.
As you speak about the heart, like I know I can feel into it, and I'm sure most people can, that heartache. Like, this is a real thing. And it reminds me of a story that Francis Weller shares in his book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he speaks about a man who comes to him after a heart attack, and he's trying to figure out his life. And he's just, planning to just move on and kind of push the grief aside and just kind of keep everything at bay and just continue on with his life. And Francis, turns to him and says, I think that you're wasting a perfectly good heart attack. And, that hit me in a really interesting way, because these sensations and these feelings that come up, and what he was meaning was that these are messengers. These are sacred messengers. And may we not get to that extreme, but may we notice those heartaches and those leaking of anger and sadness and shut down disassociation as signs that it's time to tend, that we are being called to pay attention so that we can not waste the experience and look for the magic within it. And maybe that's quite a stretch, if we're jumping from anger to magic, maybe we need a little bit of time to get there. And what I can say and know to be true is that something quite magical happens in these spaces. and you don't need to know what you're coming for. You have the support of the ancestors in this space, and you also have the support of the earth, so that earth energy that's coming through, and the supportive community that we just don't carry with us all of the time. And I think that there's some potency in that, and some just a little bit of magic that shows up when we need it the most.
Well, in Nako Bear, a musician I love, a song that he sings is called Love Letters to God. And one of the lines in there that's coming through to me right now is like, you got to put down the weight and you got to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
We're very good at managing everything in our minds,
Yeah.
But we can drag these like backpacks of boulders with us, or throw it on our back and just be so weighed down and burdened by things in life that, it's really difficult to ever get into a space where we truly feel joy beyond maybe a fleeting moment of it. So just allowing ourselves to open that door to this cage that we've created to contain ourselves, because there's just seems like there's too much going on.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's too overwhelming, but really it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
When we connect with a group of like-minded people, like-hearted and spirited people in a sacred container, like we're doing in the immersion or the invitation, like we can resolve things so quickly. I think maybe sometimes a fear is like, oh my God, like maybe the old programming is I'm supposed to grieve this loss for like years and years and years, right?
Or grieve alone.
Or you totally grieve alone, right? That makes me think when you go to a funeral and everybody's all stoic and nobody's sharing anything. The funeral is the most appropriate place to share the grief, and everyone's all jammed up and nobody's crying, right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
Yes.
Yeah,
we haven't created, it doesn't tend to be the space for it in what seems to be the modern approach to funeral. What I can say from my own experiences, quite recently, my grandfather passed away. And there's kind of been a fracture in the family for some time. And the ability to come together and grieve actually brought up new possibility for relationship and having conversations. And there's some healing that's begun to happen in the family because of that. And so, we might tend to look at losses as, look at the downfalls or the downsides of it, but we don't tend to look at, really what are the benefits? Like, why is this happening for us? And how is this happening through us? Like, why is this loss showing up? And how can we tend to it in a way that is good? Like, how can we really be with this loss and allow it to inform our life and inform our purpose and our experience of joy and love and connectivity and all of these gifts that you spoke to?
Well, and those are the real benefits when we move through something. We can kind of come out of that fog or come out of that shadow that surrounds us. It's like that frozen energy, that numbness that we can go into, right? When we unthaw that numbness and allow the energy that's in our system that's stuck to move and do whatever it needs to do, the light of all these incredible possibilities begins to shine upon us again. And like you said, the possibility of a different kind of relationship with those around us that we care about.
Yes.
Just even being re-engaged in our life and we can begin to experience more satisfaction in all the different sort of areas of our life when we begin to open up and move with the flow again. I guess the problem, just as I'm thinking about this, is that when we're frozen and we're stuck in this space, we're not moving with the flow of life anymore.
Yeah.
We're out of the natural rhythm, and that's why I love the connection to the land piece, because that's the ceremony and ritual was designed to reattune ourselves to the connection to the land and the flow of life.
Yes.
And so if we're just standing still, stuck in our grief and not doing anything with it, we're not experiencing any of the beauty and the presence and the gifts of the flow and the rhythm of life. And so rituals, ceremony, like this stuff helps to re-engage an opening so that we can experience the flow. It's in the flow that we feel uplifted. It's in the flow that we can feel happiness, that we can feel joy, that we can feel, good emotions, right? Mm-hmm. Where we can feel ourselves being balanced and aligned. Like so many times we're out of alignment within ourselves, with our mind, with our heart, with our spirit, within our emotions, within our intuition. And so we can, all these circles are spinning in their own speeds and their own with their own variables going on. And we're off kilter. It doesn't, and so to sit together like this in a community way and in a family way and come into a greater alignment and allow ourselves to experience getting back into the flow, having that heart, mind, spirit connection, and feeling balanced again, and doing a restart, right?
Yes. And so you and I are both in a really beautiful training right now with Thomas Hubel, ancestral healing. And as you were speaking about the numbing that happens, two things I'll share about. One, who this might not be for, this kind of work is somebody who has a really fresh loss and they're still like in an intense, painful time where they just don't have the capacity to deal with this. And the reason that I'm bringing it up right now as we speak about Thomas Hubel is, he talks about the intelligence of disassociation. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when a loss is so painful that it's difficult for us to be in the body, sometimes there's an intelligence to that disassociation. And the other piece I'll speak to is when you were talking about, everything kind of coming back into space, like in that disassociation, we get fragmented. Like parts of us are just kind of all over the place. And this work, as you rebalance, like as you're talking about coming into that space of balance, is the bringing back. It's like the gathering of all of the pieces that we might have left. And maybe at different times when there was an intelligence to leave it there, when there was an intelligence to kind of set it aside. And the other lovely, talking about that flow and coming into balance, like the seasons don't stop, right? The natural world doesn't stop in order to, keep these things at bay. It continues on. And so, as you said, coming back into the flow of life, coming back into the seasonality of our life, there are periods of time where we're in that frozen state. Mm-hmm. And there are periods of time where it's time to tend to it, where it's time to actually be witnessed and held and resource ourselves in a way that is going to help us to rebalance and to re-enter that flow.
Yeah, and just speaking about that, it makes me think about who else benefits from us doing. Mm. Whoever's close to you within your family circle, your circle of friends, your circle of influence. If you're seen as the go-to person who's usually, pretty resourceful, and people see you struggling and you don't try to hide your pain, you actually allow them to come and help you, and then you do something to process some of the emotion or some of the things that you're experiencing, and they get to see you moving through your process of grieving, especially people who have kids and people who lean on you for support, like you showing up, especially moving forward, because the transformation and the transitions that we're going through in the world, it just seems like more and more people are passing, more and more relationships are coming undone. And so more and more grief is happening. And if we're people in the world who are, leading change, or we're people in the world who are, especially like coaches and people who are counselors and people who are energy practitioners and people who are, new thought leaders, if you want to call it that. If we're going to be out there in the world, saying that we're helping support creating this new vision in the world, and we're going to do it with our fullest capacity and awareness and energy, right? Because that's one of the biggest losses of shutdown is our capacity to have optimal energy to be able to function with in a really good way. If we're going to be out there in the world leading this change and being at the forefront of it, then we have to do our own work too, right? And so I know how easy it is to push things aside. And I also know that coming back to myself and my balance and my center, coming back to the emotional stuff, the business that's going on within me, and getting the support or doing the ritual work or the things that I need to do in order to continue to heal forward and to grow and evolve. And that's who this is for in my mind.
Yes, I'm with you on that. And like in truth, my desire would be to do some form of grief work every month. We tend to wait until it's just so intense that we have no other choice but to seek out help. And I actually asked this question of Francis Weller when we were on a call of like, how often do we do this work? Like how often? And he said, find a group of like-hearted friends or people in your community and meet monthly, so that you can unburden, so that you can be witnessed and witness and continue that, so that it's not like, as you put it, we're not continuing to put the boulders in. We can maintain that sense of lightness and spaciousness and flow. If we tend to it on a regular basis, it becomes even more rich of an experience, because as we set those boulders down, as we become lighter, what fills us is the gifts of that, and then we bring those gifts back to the community. So like you were just speaking about in terms of who this benefits, every time we tend to our losses and our experience of suffering, there's a gift that is brought to you, and then you get to bring that back to the community. And maybe that's in the way of sharing your experience of grief and how to tend to it. Or perhaps it's an awareness or a new experience that you've gained that you can now share and uplift. Like there's so much richness in this continuation of grief work.
Deeper insights into who we really are, and more of who we really are, and our purpose, our chosen purpose as to why we're here in the world. Reflecting is a powerful thing, right? And we don't do enough of it, for sure.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that covers all of the bases. My sincere hope is that, and desire is that, as many heart-centered humans as possible choose to do this work. And while I know we might have some limited capacity in what we can hold in this container, I really hope that you hear the call, and that you listen to it, and that you see the importance of doing this work, and knowing that you coming into this space isn't just for you, it's also for all of the other people that you'll be in service to. So while we're being witnessed, we're also witnessing. And there's a lot of potency in that.
I can feel that potency. I know this is an invitation for a grief ritual and an ancestral wisdom experience, immersion experience, and I'm just like, I'm excited about this, right? And of course, you know what? Cue the I don't know what you call it. It only makes sense to me that right now I've been having things coming up already and things going on that I'm having to address and deal with, and this is a part of the thing. Like I have a knowing. I'm like looking forward to this weekend, but I already got my own things that are coming up, right?
Yeah.
So it's part of the process. I guess cue the standard process as we're getting ready to work, like my own grief work is showing up, right?
Yeah, and that's what the dreaming does. The dreaming prepares us ahead of time. So the moment that we have a knowing that we're to do something, it's like, okay, here you go. Let's ripen. Let's bring
it ready for it, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we can end the recording there. And unless there's anything more that you wanted to say, I know we didn't really introduce ourselves. I just jumped right in.
Yeah, we could introduce ourselves, but I guess I just, if not now, then when? That's always the question, right?
Mm.
When are we going to get to it? Okay, because you said, like we said, it's easy to just kind of push things to the side, and we're going to keep moving forward with things in life. But if not now, then when? I see so many people struggling with addiction,
Yeah.
and at the root of their addiction is like a ton of grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And just that phrase, if not now, then when, I think really brings us into presence and the importance and the impermanence of our life. And I think that that's a really powerful way to look at it. There's this concept of dying unto death. Like every day, every moment is a new opportunity to experience loss and rebirth. It's like, it's not something that just happens over here. It's like a continual rebirthing process. And so why would you wait? There's no point in waiting because it needs tending now. There is no tomorrow guaranteed.
Yeah. And that's right. There's the aliveness of life that we're speaking about, right?
Yeah. 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 And some of the gifts that you discover when you're able to put down the heaviness.
Mm-hmm. And get out of your own way.
Yeah.
So my name is Orest Zwozdesky. I'm an evolutionary life coach, a speaker, a budding author, a budding podcaster. You know what? I'm in the business of we-ness. I've recently figured this out. I knew it before. I was already doing it, but I recently just thought in my mind, this evolutionary life coaching stuff is all about having a spiritual foundation and approach to what I'm creating in the world and how it impacts the collective and the whole, and how it impacts the planet. And so I'm working with people who are interested in creating that vision that's going to be around we-ness. And that's a part of what I call, the evolutionary edge. We know we're getting to tune into our larger vision, but how does this serve the greater good as part of my larger vision? So that's a part of the process of evolutionary life coaching, looking at the mind, body, spirit, emotional wellness of a human being, and being able to then, connect with the collective and be a part of my individual, self and the collective. And so this is a bit of a different approach, which everyone has their own approach, but spiritual foundation and honoring and nurturing the ancestral realm with people, and really calling in, the energy that's available and the power of that as well. So that's a part of this evolutionary and the connection to unity consciousness. So that's a whole lot of ways. And so I show up and I speak about the evolutionary edge in keynote talks and in what's the word for it? It's like an online program that's soon to launch this year. So, so that's what I do. That's who I am.
That's who you are. That's wonderful. And I'm Carolyn Stewart. I am a soul activist and a guide of nourishing practices. So that's my jam, and I do it in a lot of different ways, guiding ritual and retreat and meditation and breathwork and ancestral nutrition. Like all of these pieces have come together for me in a really potent way. And at the heart of it is this deep knowing that it is our birthright to be nourished, to really experience the aliveness of who we are and who we've come here to be. So to live fully in and on purpose. And this work that we do, whether through grief or tending to grief, or going into the spaces of how we nourish our body and our mind and our spirit, it all comes down to it for me that, we are these multidimensional complex beings that are attuned to something so much greater than our limited capacity for just thought. And so really early on in my life, I got into those spaces of curiosity around what exists beyond the mind. And then I started to recognize the power of the mind when we can tap into the subconscious. And so that's really where a lot of my stuff comes from. And so, yeah, I share through courses and workshops and retreats and podcasts and talks, and budding author as well. So I love that we share some of these magical things and get to be in these spaces together.